Hello everyone, welcome to Tucson Festival of Books 2023. My name is Carl and I'm from the Pima County Public Library. And I'm here with students from Sabino High School and they're going to interview Cruz, author of the Headmaster's List. Take it away.
I'm Mia Anderson. I'm with Sabino High School Library here at the Festival of Books. I wanted to start off with a fun question. What's your go-to inspiration snack?
My go-to inspiration snack, I actually am not a snacker, so I don't really snack a lot. But, you know, if it's like kind of an inspiration thing, trying to think what did I do to get inspiration. I nap. I have a go-to inspiration nap. So that is what I do. If I feel, stymied or frustrated, and I'm like, I'm just going to take a nap. So.
I guess to follow up with that, how do you get out of like your reading or writing slumps?
So I have written 67 books, and I think the answer to my writing slumps, at least, is that I work on another project. So if I'm frustrated or don't know what I'm doing with one book, I just work on the other one. And I always work on the book that's not due, because the book that has no pressure is the one that's most fun to write. So I do that, and I think that is why I'm very prolific, because every time I come to a point where, I'm tired, I don't want to work on this book anymore, I'm just like, I'll work on this other book.
What would you say is your biggest struggle as a writer? Because you said how it's hard to, like, certain books are left, or you get frustrated with certain books.
Yeah, I think what's frustrating is that you have to make a decision. So basically, that's kind of where all kind of procrastination and frustration comes from. It's just like, do I take the plot here? Do I take this character there? What do I do now? And that's the point where, you kind of don't want to decide because you don't have the answer yet. Mm-hmm. So I kind of leave that until, there's almost like a gun to my head or like a deadline. And then I'm like, okay, I've got to decide, what fairy tales are never after, or, what's going to happen. I always know the endings of my books and I always know the beginnings. So I always know the beginning and the end, and then I write a whole outline. So I always know what's going to happen in each chapter. But there are certain things, that even in the chapter, I'll leave up to, when I actually get there to write it. Because, I don't want to write everything out, and also I haven't thought about that yet. So when I get there, I'm like, okay, actually we're going to do the Snow White retelling for these chapters. Or we're going to do, we're going to weave in Camelot for this story. And that kind of comes, when I'm literally under so much pressure, and I'm like, okay, I've made this decision. So, I don't, it's just a creative process. It's not really frustrating. It's more that, I think people think that creativity or, writing books is just like checking off things on an Excel sheet. Like, it's so different from anything else that we do. Like, you have to be able to not know a lot of things to be creative. And I think that, even I've read books, written by people who, read the screenwriting guidelines, like Save the Cat, here are all the beats, here are all the pivots, here's the exciting incident. And they're still really boring. Like, in a way, they're still not alive. So I think that the way to make the books alive is to have that, kind of not knowing it, because, that's where the magic happens. And, I don't know. And so forcing that, I think that is what, people don't understand. It's like, you can't force it. Like, it is this process. It is this journey you have to go on to write it. And even though it's so obvious in the end, like, that's such an obvious thing that I should have done in the book, or, well, that was easy, I just made him the villain, and then the story clicked. Like, you don't get that in the beginning. You actually get it from working on your story, from writing it out. I was just talking to a couple of authors last night, and one of the authors said, I just have to write it, even if it doesn't end up in the book, I have to write that scene so I know where they're coming from. And it's just, kind of this journey that you have to be open to.
Yeah.
So what would you say is your favorite part of the process then?
Yeah, I think, like when everything's clicking and, I'm, entertaining myself and I'm laughing and I'm kind of cackling, I'll be like, that's when I really enjoy it, and I write the books for myself. I write them to entertain myself. And if I'm entertained, then I feel like other people will be entertained. So I'll read, I read this book, The Headmaster's List. So it's about 4 kids who are in a car crash and one of them dies. And I had plotted it all out. I had all the outlines, and then it came back to me, so I'd kind of forgotten about it. So I'd written it, turned it to my editor, worked on another book, and came back for final edits. And I read it again, and I thought, oh my God, it's kind of boring. I felt like, the twist wasn't enough, so I really thought about like how I could change it. So I changed the ending, even at the very, very end of the process.
I'm Corey Griffin. How do you get into your mindset when writing books?
It's my job, and I've been working full time as a writer now for like 25 years. So it's a job like anything else. I don't think you have to wait for the muse. I think you just have to start working, and then even if it's not coming to you, you still have to put words on the page because then you can always revise. And, I kind of treat it almost like a 9-to-5 job. I used to write really late at night. I just got used to that. And that's how I would work. I would work from 5 p.m. to like 10 p.m. or 5 p.m. to like 2 a.m. But then when I had a baby 16 years ago, that whole, I'd been working as a writer for 10 years before I had my kid. And I had to change that entire way of working because I had to be awake for my child. I just couldn't work at night anymore. So now I mostly work from about 8 a.m. to around 2 p.m. And that's kind of my writing time. And then after lunch, I kind of don't really do any more writing. Like I do a lot of admin, I answer emails, I do some social media promotion. And then after dinner, sometimes if I'm on deadline, I'll work again, from 8 to 10 or 8 to midnight.
So since you have so many books and you're such a great writer, able to conduct so much at one time, how do you develop your universes? Because they're so complex.
Like I said, I always know the beginning and the end. And some of my books I've thought about for like 10 years or, many years before I do any work on them. So when I start writing, I already know what the story is because it's been in my head for so long. Like the Headmaster's List was probably in my head for about 5 years. And then Never After, probably 3 years. So, I really think about it for a long time. And then once I start writing, that's when I know what it's about. I don't just start the blank page and have no idea. Like I already have an idea in my head of what I'm going to write about. It's just different with a fantasy world. You have to figure out the rules. What does it look like? How many kingdoms are there? What are the rules of magic? So it's a little bit more complicated. I try to keep it a little bit open because I know I'm going to have other books and I don't want to write myself into a corner. With contemporary, it's a little bit easier, because we're in our world, so you don't have to make up a world. So fantasy books definitely take a longer time, to just really, you have to write the mythology. I did a book called The Queen's Assassin, where I just had to make up everything. So the mythology, and then the land, and then the history. And every time I write a fantasy book, I tell my family, tell me never to write one of these again. They're so difficult, so.
So with these universes in each of these books, do you want each book to stand on its own, or do you want it to go, if it's a part of a series, or just do you want to make it stand?
Yeah, I think each book has to stand on its own, and be a satisfying read. So there's a main story in each of them that gets resolved in the book, and then maybe a bigger story with a series arc, that's kind of left open. But yeah, I think that they should stand on its own. But I like series books. I like going back and meeting characters that I've liked before. So I'm also a big series reader. So I'm a series reader and I'm a series writer. And I like when the story just goes on and on and on. Well, what about their kids? And what about their grandkids? And what about after that? I like when stories definitely go on. So
Yeah.
How do you know when to like stop in like your book, or do you like ever just want to keep going with it, or do you just like be like, okay, I have to like set a certain like ending for this certain book?
Yeah, no, I always know the ending. So I know the ending of each of my books. So I know that once I get there, and I actually build my books from the end because it's easier to build it backwards. Because once you know the end, you can kind of build up to it. And so I kind of build my books from the end and from the beginning, and then in the middle is kind of where I get a little bit, have to figure out what the middle is. And if I get to a point where, there's no middle, it's always like the messy middle, what happens in the middle is always the difficult part. But yeah, most books, especially with middle grade, most people expect a certain number of word counts from like 60,000, probably like the longer end, even though some books go on and on. I think we're kind of coming back to shorter middle grade books again. And then with YA, you can go all the way up to, I think my longest book was like 90,000 words, which is very long for me. I think this was about maybe 86,000. This was a little long. But I wrote another thriller that was going dark. That was, I think, about 65,000. So, I mean, once you're out of story, that's it,
With writing Going Dark and the Headmaster list, they're both like mystery thrillers. What like happened for you to want to change into this?
Yeah. Like I said, I thought about Headmaster's List for a long time. I actually wanted to write it from the parents' point of view. So it was inspired by something that happened in our community. There was a kid who was not in our school anymore, but he'd gone to our school and we'd known him since kindergarten. And then one day, one of my mom's friends said, "Oh, do you know what happened to, let's call him John. Do you know what happened to John?" And I said, "No, what happened to John?" And apparently on his 17th birthday, he had taken his dad's brand new Mercedes and driven with his girlfriend down Ventura Boulevard at 120 miles an hour. And he smashed into two cars and killed two people. And, when we found that out, I mean, I was on the floor. I was like, what? Like, that is just terrible. How could that have happened? How could a kid that we know, somebody that grew up, among us, how can you do something so terrible? There was no drugs, there was no drinking. So, the question everybody had was like, how did this happen? And one of the things that, the moms and even the kids who knew him said, well, nobody's ever said no to him. So that kind of stayed with me, and I thought about that. If you raise a kid who you never say no to, he's dangerous. It's this rich and reckless kid. And so I wanted to write it as an adult book, and about the parents. But then when I was writing it, I realized that I write for teenagers, and I should really put the camera in the right place. So I went back and rewrote it as a teen thriller. So I wanted to write about that, just to kind of investigate those things. That's not the story in the book. I also needed some distance from that. And then with Going Dark, I was kind of inspired by, the Gabby Petito story, because we just knew so much about that disappearance. Like, I was kind of shocked at the level of detail that me, just as a casual reader of news, knew, and that everybody knew. And, just kind of learning, about, other disappearances that don't get any traction in the media. And, just kind of struck me as being really kind of strange and unfair. And so I wanted to write a book kind of about that. And I don't think I really meant it to be a thriller. It kind of became a thriller, as I was working on the outlines for that book. And then kind of became about sisters and, and about social media. So, I don't know. I definitely wanted to write a thriller with Headmaster's List. I wanted to write about, somebody who'd experienced a car crash but couldn't remember it. So, she's kind of like the detective and kind of the person that we're following along as she, finds out the truth. But I feel like all stories have mystery. Like all stories, even Never After, which is a fairy tale retelling, or Blue Bloods, there's a lot of narrative tension and there's a lot of mystery in the story, even if it's not a thriller. You want to turn the pages so that you find out what happens.
So you talk you wrote romance and thriller and mystery, but what's your personal favorite genre to read?
To read. I really like, I think they call it now romantasy, kind of YA, romance, fantasy. So my favorite authors are Maggie Stiefvater, Holly Black, and Lee Barbadugo. I really like, I came from, I wrote Blue Bloods. That was one of my first YA books, and, it was a vampire novel but with a lot of romance and adventure and kind of thrills, and so I still like that genre, kind of like the Twilight genre, and the people who are still kind of working in that. Yeah.
What is your favorite genre to write?
What is my favorite genre to write?
Yeah,
right now I'm really enjoying writing my middle grade books. I feel like they're really silly and they're really fun. They make me laugh, I really enjoy them. I like YA too, but I've written a lot of YA novels, so I feel like, the middle grade is kind of a nice break from that, all that angst for a while.
What do you feel like is your biggest accomplishment as an author?
Oh, that's a good question. I don't know. It's hard to rest on your laurels. I really am proud of the Blue Blood series. When I started writing that, my editor said, let's get to 19 books. And I said, oh my God, we're never going to get to 19 books. But when I look at how many books came out of Blue Bloods, which is 7 novels and 3 spin-offs, we actually, when I counted them all, they were about 18 books. So I was like, wow, I really built a big universe. And, I could have written those books forever. And I guess I still am, because I have a new Blue Bloods book coming out in July called After Death. I even did a reboot because I wanted to write about my characters. I didn't want to write about, their children. I actually didn't want to do that. I wanted to just go back and write about my original characters. And I thought, how am I going to do that? And so I pitched my editor. I said, let's just do it. But it's like now they're in our world, and it's 2020, and it's the pandemic, and vampires caused the pandemic. So I really like that. So I think Blue Bloods, I'm really proud of. I'm also really proud of The Ring and the Crown, which is going to be a show on Disney Plus. I feel like that was one of my best books. It was about history and magic, and I just had a lot of fun writing it. And I also feel a little vindicated because the book, I think it was a little bit ahead of its time when it came out, and didn't get the reception that we wanted, that we expected. And but now, it's getting this huge TV treatment, and I just feel like, I knew that was a good book. So.
Speaking of Disney, what's it like working with Disney?
It's really fun. I'm a big Disney kid. I ended up a Disney author because my editor, Simon Schuster, took a job there, and she brought me with her. So I've been with Disney now for 20 years, and I feel like I've been there the longest. My editors have left. Other people have come in. And it's good. I've been there for 14 years when they asked me to do Descendants. So that was fun, being part of like a big, kind of creative team that, brought that, $1 billion franchise to life. It was kind of amazing to work with so many moving parts. Like you would write something and then it would, be something that would be like, well, is this what the wand looks like? Or is this, what you pictured? And, is this how purple we want Mal's hair to be? And I was like, wow, this is so crazy. You're just part of this big machine. So, I think, and then the fact that I felt really comfortable in the universe because I knew the Disney movies really well, and mostly because my kid was around 7 years old when I started Descendants. So we had just rewatched all of the classic movies, so I knew them really well, but I had loved them when I was a child. And then, and then she was watching the Disney Channel shows with Dove Cameron, so I knew the tone of the Disney Channel shows as well. So it just felt really, really kind of perfect, And I think that, don't seem like a Disney person, but I actually am. Like, they asked me to send us photos from, from when we were at the parks, when we did our presentation about Descendants, and it was me as the author, and I just went through all my camera roll, and there we are at the parks every year. Maddie dresses as a princess. So.
What would you say, like, your a really big struggle you have as a writer?
I try not to couch things in like a negative way. I think I struggle sometimes with the promotion part, and I think that that's the part that all writers, we didn't really expect, because we like to write, which means we like to be alone. We like to be alone in our own head, writing our books. Most of us are introverts. So, having to go on tour, I just discovered I left my electric toothbrush at the last hotel I was in. And I'm like, oh, like every tour I lose certain things. This tour I've lost my reading glasses and my electric toothbrush, and I lost my itinerary. I know, it's terrible. So whenever they say, oh, we want you to go out and promote it, there's always a slight feeling of dread. But then when you go out, and you meet your readers and you meet, young people like you guys, it's always like, oh, okay, this was worth it, It's worth it to leave the office once in a while.
Did you ever expect, like, when you were young, did you ever expect yourself to become what you are now?
Yeah, I always had the dream. I wanted to be a writer since I was 8 years old. And there were certain things that I thought about that was what writer's life was like, and one of them was the movie Stand By Me, which was based on the Stephen King short story. And in the end, one of them, I think Gordy becomes a writer, and he's like in his beautiful house, and his kids are running around outside, and and there was just something so satisfying and so successful about that. So I always had that as a goal, one day. But, in a way, nobody knows, especially being an author, it's not like going to law school or med school, there's not this path where you do this, this, and this, and, you will get a book deal and you will be a writer. It's kind of something that I had to figure out on my own. And in a way, we're all just still figuring it out, especially if you're writing full time. Yeah, so I'm kind of glad I figured it out, but there was definitely a moment, especially in I'd wanted to be a writer. I'd been creative all my life. My parents were very supportive, of all my artistic endeavors. But then you go to college, and then they start saying stuff like, "What are you going to do with your life?" And I was like, "Well, I'm going to be a writer." And they were like, "How's that going to happen?" Suddenly it's like, "Oh, you have to be practical. You have to have a job." And I was like, really? Never thought about this. So that was kind of sad. And, and then my friends in college were all going to be lawyers. So they all signed up to take a class for the LSAT. And they said, do you want to take the class with us? And I said, okay, I guess, being a lawyer is kind of like being a writer. I guess I could write briefs and I could do research. I like doing that. So I thought, okay, I guess I'll be a lawyer since nobody thinks being a writer is something that anybody can do. And then my mom sent a check to cover the cost of the tutoring class. And, I remember receiving that check, and I actually never cashed it because it was $1,500, which was a lot of money. And I was a scholarship kid, and I thought, I don't want to waste this money. If I cash this check, I'm going to take the class, I'm going to take the LSAT, I'm going to apply to law school, I'm going to be a lawyer. And I just knew, I thought, I'm going to be 30 and miserable. And I thought, I don't want to do that. I'm going to figure it out. And that was the first time that I really felt like, I had said kind of decided my own path in life. You can just let life kind of, bring you around, you kind of get carried by waves. Okay, I guess I'll be a lawyer. But that's really the first time I was like, no, I was 19 years old, and I was like, I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to cash this check. I'm going to figure out how to be a writer. So,
speaking of goals and expectations, how did the pandemic change kind of your trajectory?
The secret about the pandemic is that if you're a writer, your life did not change at all. Because, I work from home, I get everything delivered, my family makes fun of me. I think there was a show and it was about housebound seniors. And they said, "That's you, Mom, you're a housebound senior." Because I literally get everything delivered. I get groceries delivered, I shop online, there are some days, I don't leave the house. I can be in the house for 4 days without even noticing that I never left. I was talking to another author, I was like, yeah, I walked to the mailbox. But that's all I did. So in a way, when the world shut down, it wasn't that bad. But then when it kept on going and going, and in LA, we were locked down for a long time, and I got actually really depressed. And the thing that I couldn't do during the pandemic in my depression was read. So that's actually the only time I could not read. I just felt like it was too much mental energy to read. So that's when I watched a lot of TV. I've never been the person who watches a lot of TV. And during the pandemic, it was just, I just wanted to be a zombie. So that was really weird because I'm just not that person. I felt like that was a sign of the depression. And, mostly it was just feeling like, are we ever going to get out of this? Is this the way it's going to be? Especially, my kid was in high school, Zooming to class, and basically just opening her laptop and then going back to sleep, I know what you guys did during the pandemic, just no learning for a year and a half. And, and just seeing, all the bad habits, that my kid got. She was up until 5 a.m. talking to all her friends. They were all up. They couldn't see each other. So it just even though she was always on her phone, I think, during the pandemic, she was on her phone all the time, just constantly. And that was just, just really disturbing. So I think in a way, I was always able to work. I'm able to work because work is my escape. When my dad had cancer, I would work in the hospital. I would write my books on a laptop in his room. So I've always been able to work and tune out the world. But, kind of the off hours when, it was kind of time to relax, usually that's when I would read. I couldn't do that. So that was weird.
How did you get out of that depressive state?
Yeah, I think it just slowly lifted. And then I finally I think I probably read Holly Black's book, and that kind of helped me get out of it. I was like, okay, I can still read books. I'm still, interested. And then just slowly, I think, as they started kind of lifting the restrictions, to be honest, I think we went to Florida and I was like, oh, this is so nice. We didn't have to wear masks. It's great. And, and then just seeing that the world was going on. And then another part was, we all also got COVID in 2021, 22, the Omicron one. We all went to see Spider-Man. It was the first movie that we'd seen in the theater. And my whole family got COVID, and we were really worried, but then everybody kind of recovered pretty easily. So,
like you said, where writing was your escape. Was there any moments in your career that you just couldn't?
Not really. I really like working. I really like working. It really is kind of a crutch, and it's kind of a happy place for me is working. So I'll be the kind of person who'll be like, oh my god, I'm so stressed out, I need to go on vacation, let's go, and I'll force everybody, my whole family, to go on vacation with me, and then on the third day I'll be bored. And I'll be like, when do I get back to my computer? So I'm never the kind of person, because I've been on vacation with friends, and I've seen it, nobody wants to go back to their life, or they'll be like, oh, let's do a couple more days, let's stay, I don't want to go back. I always want to go back. I actually really like my job, I like what I do, and I think I'm really lucky that I get to do it. So, yeah. Trying to think. It's hard. I actually think success is hard, because when I started out, I was kind of a, what they used to call a mid-list writer. Your books would sell, but they weren't bestsellers, but they sold steadily. And I was that kind of writer for about 10 years. And then when Blue Bloods became this huge phenomenon, it was almost hard because it was like, oh, well, what does this mean? And my head would get bigger, and they were like, oh, we're going to do a TV show, and then the head expanded again, and and then my husband, and then they didn't. Then in the end, they didn't do a TV show, and the little balloon head shrank down, and kind of went back to normal. And my husband said, yeah, you were kind of terrible during that time, And then I just realized, like, you just have to have kind of an equilibrium, no matter what's happening, and you have to kind of, like, my work and my career are like in one part of my life, but they're not really, they're not the most important part of my life. It's me as a person, and me as a mom, as a wife, as a friend, and that's actually where I get my self-esteem from. You really have to divorce yourself from how the market sees you. You can't be depressed if the book doesn't sell, and you can't be this huge arrogant person if the book does well. So I've always been like, oh, that's nice, oh, it did well, oh, that's nice, oh, it's not selling, oh, well, next one.
So do you prefer books over social media, since you said that, like, you read books more?
Oh yeah, definitely.
So
Yeah, I don't do a lot of social media, aside from, I guess, promoting myself, which I find, a little tedious, but, like, I only do stuff if it's fun, so I'll post it, if it's fun, and, just to let people know where I am, or this book is out, But I also try to approach it in a way that it's fun for me. I was like, oh, I'll post this photo of dinner. We look fun, These are my friends. We look good, My daughter has started to not want to be in my social media, which is kind of funny, because if I post a photo, she's always there going, delete, 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 I'm like, all right. Yeah, but I don't actually, I don't really watch any TikToks or Reels. I mean, I guess I do a little bit. So my Instagram is like a lot of puppies, baking, and Japan. For some reason. It's very strange.
What's your favorite animal, since we're going on?
Oh, I love dogs. So I have a little Maltese. Yeah, she's very cute.
Readers obviously have demands. How do you handle those?
Yeah, it's interesting. With Blue Bloods, there was kind of a fandom, and then when you disappoint them, they're very mad. So I used to call them fanamies. They love you so much they hate you. You just can't let it get to you too much. I tend to, I'm interested, if somebody has a bad review, or, was a fan and was let down, I'll be like, oh, okay. I'll read their, little diatribe, and then I'll be like, well, sorry. At one point, so Witches of East End became a TV show, and I had lost the password to my fan mail. And so I had no idea that a lot of people were really upset and didn't like the show because it wasn't really like the books. And so I was like, oh, that's kind of nice. I didn't get to read any of that email. People have their own reactions to things. So, and my fans, that's very rare. I'm not going to say I've never disappointed a lot of people, but I feel that's kind of like a small, kind of a small percentage. My fans actually are really, really sweet and very nice. So it's just, very, very rare. I've never, some authors have gotten such very kind of crazed fandoms. Like, I'm friends with Cassie Clare, and, one fan of me, like, actually, like stabbed her hand at a signing. Like, that was shocking. Like, I was like, the fact that somebody would do that, and she's just an author, and it was kind of crazy. Like, I remember, being like, are you okay? Like, that's insane, So, after that, I run a book festival to Y'all West and the Y'all Fest, and so we always had security for Cassie. But, thankfully, that's never happened to me. And, yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think fan service is something that creators do, but you also need to serve the story first. So, I always write the story that I want to write, and I don't really care what everybody else thinks. Like, I wrote the story that I wanted, so, but yeah, I can see that with long running series, people getting really into things and, yeah, crazy.
But what brings you when you have your not due books and you can really take your time on it? What brings the creativity to you?
I think not having the pressure. That's why I work on the book that's not due, which my editors are always upset about. I'm like, but I worked on the book. It's like, yeah, that's not due till next year. What about the book that's due now? I'm like, oh. I think pressure is really hard, and especially pressure to make everything a hit is hard, and I think publishing is now being a lot like Hollywood, where everybody expects kind of these blockbusters. And that just, isn't something that anybody can control. You can only write, I always say, well, I tried my best. And literally all my books I've tried my best at. And some of them sell really well and some of them don't. And that's just the way it is. That's just, creativity. You just have to give writers the space to, to tell their stories. I mean, everybody wants a template or a formula or some kind of nobody wants to accept that you just don't know. You just don't know, and sometimes it's timing, sometimes it's just, the cover, the title, the package, everything has to align for something to sell really well. Sometimes you have everything and it looks like a great package and it still doesn't sell. But maybe it was the timing, like The Ring and the Crown. Right now, everybody loves it, and it's just so strange, that, I wrote that book 10 years ago, and nobody was ready for it. So, all the business affairs people, all the accounting people, they want to have, real, I guess, guarantees of things that are creative. But, books and movies and things that are creative, you just don't know, so.
Does the pressure ever get to you?
Yeah, the pressure is hard. I think that's the hardest part, honestly. But and I think 10 years ago was much harder because I came from kind of the vampire years, and it just felt like every book is going to just be this amazing blockbuster, and then you just wonder can I do that again? And then you get a little arrogant, I think. And I think now I just kind of approach things all right, we'll try this, and we'll do everything we can. We'll promote it, we'll do that. But, I think I'm more distant from that now. I think I've kind of I kind of have learned how to live with the pressure, so I don't let it get to me.
Did you learn that writing was your passion?
I think it just was. I loved reading. I always loved reading, and I loved books. And I just wanted to be part of that conversation. I think art is in conversation with other art, and because I loved books so much, I wanted to create them. So yeah, I mean, it just ended up being the thing that I like to do the most. I really, like I said, I didn't watch a lot of TV. Even when my books get turned into TV things, it's oh, that's nice, but it's not what kind of drives me. I think there's not a lot of authors, who come into this business and they, the minute Hollywood taps on their shoulder, off they go, and they're just so interested in the Hollywood side and want to be screenwriters and producers or something, mostly screenwriters. I never had that dream. This is my dream. I wanted to write books and be paid for writing books and only write books, and that's kind of it, Yeah, I mean, it was kind of easy because I was just so focus, and I think a lot of people, are jealous of that. How did you know that's what you wanted to do, or that you're so lucky that you knew that? And I guess I did feel pretty lucky because, I was a good writer, and I figured out the business, and then, I've just been doing the same thing for 20 years. So.
When you were first becoming an author, who inspired you?
I love Stephen King, so I was a huge horror reader, and I read him throughout my entire teen years. I also loved Lord of the Rings and Dune. So those two book series were huge in my childhood. And Little Women, I think like all female writers, kind of have a little debt to Jo March, kind of wanted to be up in the attic, writing. So, and then, just like being kind of a fantasy and a horror reader. And then later on, when I was in college, I really liked Bret Easton Ellis and Jay McInerney. I wanted to write about New York and those kinds of books. And Bret Easton Ellis actually tried to option Blue Bloods back in the day. And my agent said, I don't think we got to go with him. His take is way too dark. And I was like, no, but it's Bret Easton Ellis. Especially Stephen King, because he would always write, a little kind of letter to his readers in front of his books or at the end of his books. And it felt like he was talking to me. He'd have this like Dear Constant Reader letters, and he just seemed like such a great guy, like a great writer, somebody who would tell stories but also was like a real person, who was kind of relatable.
Mm-hmm.
Would you say like what author would you like love to like partner with for like a book or something?
Yeah, to collaborate with. Think about that. I have collaborated with people. I wrote 2 books with my best friend Margaret Stoll, who wrote Beautiful Creatures. We did a Little Women retelling together called Jo and Laurie, and then kind of a Secret Garden retelling called The Secret Princess. And Soman Chinani and I have been talking about doing a book together. He wrote the School for Good and Evil, so he's a big Disney fan too. So yeah, so we're kind of joking.
I'm so sorry, that's so exciting.
But we've talked about this for years, so I don't know if we're ever going to do it, but maybe we will.
That's really exciting.
Really exciting. Sorry.
I'll tell Soman your name. Plus gasps. He likes that.
Oh my gosh, that's awesome. Sorry.
Well, if you do, just let her know.
I will.
How would you say like your original background? Like, have you any of your books, or like how do you?
Yeah, I've written a couple of books with Filipino characters. The first book I wrote, it was a YA in 2003, so about 20 years ago. One of my first novels was called Fresh Off the Boat, which is actually a story of my family and how we immigrated to America. It's the only book that my dad and my daughter have ever read of mine, which is kind of funny. And then I wrote a book called Something in Between about a Filipino high school senior who discovers that she's actually here. She's an undocumented immigrant, and kind of like her journey after discovering that, because she's trying to go to college, trying to get scholarships, and they actually asked me to write that because it was like with an imprint with 17 magazine, and we wanted to, kind of issue novels. So I actually didn't really want to write it because I was like, I don't want to go over that. We weren't undocumented. That was not our story at all. But just kind of the pain of going back and talking about, but our journey, because my parents got their green cards when I was over the age of 21, just brought back a lot of kind of painful memories of trying to become an American. So I really didn't want to write it, but I ended up writing it. And then I'm writing a new book now called The Encanto's Daughter, which has some Filipino mythology in it. So I'm very excited about that.
What was your least favorite book to write?
Least favorite book. After Something in Between, I wrote Someone to Love, which was a little bit painful because it was about, eating disorders. So that was kind of based on a lot of my friends and, kind of experience that was very painful. So that was a little hard to write, and I wanted to make sure that I wrote it well, because while I didn't have that lived experience, I wanted to, make sure it was authentic. And I think, that was a little hard, I don't tend to write kind of, these were two books that were kind of, with 17 magazine that wanted to talk about, issues pertaining to teens. So, but those were not the kind of books that I usually am drawn to writing. So so I tend to like to write either fantasy books or like kind of silly books or kind of fun books. So those two were kind of like just kind of more sad and harder to write for me. I don't really like to live in that space.
Okay. Well, thank you for speaking with us. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you guys. Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks.